Hello and welcome back. Today we are going to be doing a relatively short book review on Touching the Void. It's going to be short because while this is a nonfiction book, it's narrative in structure and it's autobiographical, and it is by Joe Simpson, who was a mountain climber, or still is, to some, well, he's probably retired by now. And Joe Simpson was off on an adventure, or misadventure rather, in South America, climbing a mountain when calamity struck. And this book details what happened and his, harrowing experience of trying to survive. So what ended up happening, just kind of TLDR, and I suppose spoilers, I guess, although if you're getting the book, you probably know to some extent what happens. He goes to climb the mountain with his partner, Simon. I think the last name is Yates, not 100% sure. And they get up the mountain, and then they start having difficulties coming down. They start having a lot of difficulties coming down, and then at one point, Joe breaks his leg. And then Joe breaks his leg, and then Simon needs to start lowering him down on a rope, and he lowers him, and eventually he lowers him off the face of a cliff. And so now there's no way for him to get back up because he's been lowered down the face of a cliff. And eventually Simon cuts the rope and he falls into a massive crevasse. And Simon thinks he's dead, and so Simon goes back to the base camp. And this is about roughly half the narrative of the book. And then the other half is Joe trying to crawl, climb, and do everything he can with an absolute shattered leg in order to climb down the rest of the mountain and then, crawl back to base camp before they leave. And it's just a very intense and visceral story, and it's very, very interesting. He has experience both as like a mountain climber, like from that perspective, and the writing is like pretty solid. I think he wasn't a writer before this, and then he started writing after this, and he's written more books. I'm not exactly 100% sure on his book background, but is very, very, very interesting, detailing like a very intense situation. And he's incredibly knowledgeable, and this is firsthand, and it's autobiographical, and so just everything about it is, you might be able to get a really intense story like this, written like decently by an author who didn't experience it himself, or like something like this. But the nature of like being delirious and like climbing down this mountain, and then like assessing risk when you're mountain climbing, just like all of that was just all just so fascinating. And it was also just like a bit of an easy book, which is one of the reasons I read it. It's about 200 pages, kind of a little bit of a layup. I haven't been reading as much as I should have been or should be in this sort of thing, and so I wanted to have some book in the rotation that was pretty easy, because I'm also reading some pretty hard books right now, and this was the book. I read it, I enjoyed it a lot. Didn't annotate too much or at all while reading it, but I would generally recommend. Well, let's get into the ratings. Okay. For utility, I gave it a 1.5. I don't really think it's too useful. I mean, they had a little bit in there about climbing, and perhaps a little bit at the end regarding like risk management and this type of thing. And like their assessment at the end was they they should have brought more fuel, because one of the reasons they had to hurry down the mountain was because they couldn't afford to spend another night, up there, because they didn't have enough fuel to make water, so they were going to get dehydrated because you have to melt the snow, this type of thing. And so like there's like some takeaways, I suppose, in the context of mountaineering, but for the most part, this book's like not really checking any boxes in terms of utility. For novelty, I gave it 4.5. I don't think it's necessarily essential to read this or this sort of thing. I think, so novelty generally kind of has two heuristics, is like, how rare is it to get this type of thing? And then the second is, how bad is it if you don't encounter this information? I don't think it's bad at all if you don't encounter this information. However, I did find, it a bit novel that you're getting kind of this first-hand account of this absolutely like death-defying situation that, to my knowledge, like I don't think there's any other book that's remotely where someone like came this close to death, in the sense of like just like freezing to death, starving to death, being dehydrated to death, There's probably a word for that I just am unfamiliar with. And then lives and then writes about it themselves, firsthand experience. And so that was tremendously interesting. And so I enjoyed it. Entertainment, I gave it an 8.5. It's written primarily for entertainment. It's short. It's a little snippet. So good. For style, I gave it a 7.5. I thought it was really well written. Considering that I don't think the guy's background was initially right, or maybe it is, in which case, it's still fairly well written enough. I think that one thing, though, they use a lot of, climbing terminology, or he uses a lot of climbing terminology when referring to things, which I saw as a plus, but there's a glossary in back as well, but some people might find that off-putting, so just thought I would mention that. Readability, I gave it a 7.5. Very, very easy to read. Maybe I should have rated this higher, but I don't think that the story was necessarily hard to convey. And then secondarily, again, he uses a lot of technical knowledge without really explaining it, but there's a glossary, and if you don't know what a word means, I mean, you can look it up, and then stuff starts to make sense. I also thought that on to interest, 7.5 as well, just kind of solid. It's an interesting look into something that's dramatically different than what I would normally experience, or kind of my everyday life, this type of thing. And so on that grounds, I found it interesting. Also learning a little bit about the process of climbing on glaciers and frozen mountains, which I'm never planning on doing, but just thinking through some of the considerations there and this sort of thing, I thought was interesting. But if you didn't want to learn about the specifics of climbing at all, or were uninterested in this information and you just wanted the story of survival, then maybe the book misses a little bit. But I found that other stuff interesting as well, so I really enjoyed it. I suppose I kind of didn't say what happens at the end. So eventually he does get back to the base camp, and right the night before, his partner's gonna leave, and he probably would have died also before morning, basically, from the sounds of things. He was completely emaciated. He lost half of his body weight throughout the entire ordeal. Because they were already haggard coming down the mountain before he broke his leg, and then before he fell into the crevasse, and had to climb his way out, and then on with one leg effectively, and then hop back several miles to base camp, and he had a rough road to recovery because they had to take him to the hospital immediately, take him to the hospital immediately when the hospital's 6 days trip away, because they're out in the middle of nowhere on this mountain, which is just intense. I would never want to be that far away from society. But he survives and he writes a book. Obviously, it's also been made into a movie with the same title, if you were interested in perhaps getting a much shorter version of the story via watching the movie. Also, there's an afterword where he talks about making the movie. So you have to get an edition of this book as after the making the movie, but he talks about making the movie, and there was an interesting bit in there as well about it being incredibly surreal for him to go back there, and just also traumatic because he's walking through the area where he almost died for a while in the remaking of the movie, when they're and he's going back through all the motions of what he did, scooting on his butt several miles or whatever. They didn't do several miles for the take, but that's what he had to do because he couldn't use his leg until he couldn't scoot anymore, and then he had to hop. Just absolutely a wild kind of story. As far as recommendations go, I think if this sounds interesting, I would recommend reading it. I don't think it's really it's a book for entertainment, I think, is the primary thrust. And if any of this sounded entertaining or this type of thing, I would recommend it. If it didn't sound entertaining or interesting at all, I wouldn't recommend it, this type of thing. There wouldn't be necessarily broad class. I suppose the nature of it being, relatively short, 200 pages, if you were looking for something a little bit on the shorter side, maybe would recommend that. I think a lot of people, I think it's something 40% of people after they finish school, whether that's high school or college, whatever their last schooling is, they don't read another book, which to me, they don't finish another book for the entirety of their lives, which to me is kind of an insane statistic, because if you want to become informed about something, man, oh man, is reading books good, because you have to vet information when reading a book, and like when you are constructing a book, like you are so much more thorough with like the construction of the information than if you are like writing a book is way more a thorough enterprise than like recording a video or something like this, or like a video essay or whatever. And so I think that the information from books is just way more solid in general. And so anyways, the point is if you are thinking of trying to get into a habit of reading a book, and this like sounded interesting, it's like nonfiction, it's like got a little bit about climbing, maybe would be a good shout. In particular, I don't have anything necessarily to say that it would be really useful for this. I suppose I would give this to someone if they were into mountaineering, but I don't know anyone who's into mountaineering or this type of thing, and so that type of recommendation through that like band of whatever is just so outside my reality that I can't even make it. Anyways, I just thought I'd do a little quick review here. Hope you enjoyed. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, do the YouTube algorithm thing. And other than that, have a good day.